Conan the Librarian.
I'm sorry. These books are a little overdue.
I love media in media, and I really love the collectible books, newspapers, and pamphlets you can find in Red Dead Redemption 2. These bring to mind memories of the long camping trips I would take as a child where I would find comfort reading paperback novels in the tent or beside the fire. Luckily, you don't even have to go and collect all these books. Any that you missed will be gathered in the Marston family bookshelf in the epilogue, where you can read them at your leisure while Abigail and Uncle and Jack wander around and bump into you and shit. I figured, hey, everyone on YouTube hates reading, or they'd be doom scrolling on Facebook instead, right? So why don't I read all these books so they don't have to? Starting with Hopes for the Future. There's this rambling madman in Annesburg, raving outside the gun shop or thereabouts, and he'll give you a copy of this book. It's all doomsaying about how we're destroying the environment and creating an uninhabitable world for future generations. He raises some good points, but he also talks about how the dinosaurs were wiped out by man in our hubris and ignorance, so I guess take it with a grain of salt. The Case of the Deceitful German and The Case of the Shrew in the Fog. These are the detective novels that Hosea likes reading, obviously based on Sherlock Holmes. I think the main joke here is that it's really easy to write a brilliant detective. You just have him say stuff and then decide that he's right. Like when the detective deduces that someone is about to knock on the door and then they do. Dan Harmon has a handy term for this approach to writing. The Monopoly guy.
Just to give you the same breakdown that the wardrobe department got in central casting, he's got a white mustache, a monocle, and a tuxedo with tails on it. And as the punchline to the whole thing, like Ace Ventura went, "Hello, I'm Ace Ventura. Pleased to meet you. Let me guess, you're the Monopoly guy." And then held for applause because you're supposed to be like, "Holy shit, he nailed it." There's that guy walking around that movie set dressed like the Monopoly guy, thinks he can get away with it. Not according to the other guy that's also in the same movie, written by the same person, who handed a memo to the lady that bought a tux, went to the wardrobe warehouse and said, "Do you have something a Monopoly guy would wear?"
Another joke in these books is that they used to say people were ejaculating all the time in turn-of-the-century literature. Existence and Oblivion. Existence and Oblivion is a Russian novel written by Nikolai Fedorov, who shares a name with real-life Russian philosopher Nikolai Fedorov. But I think the material here is intended to be more like a Dostoevsky novel, specifically The Brothers Karamazov, being an epic family drama. We get a couple pages from chapter 47 where the Denisovich brothers wrestle with disillusionment and illness, concluding with one agreeing to kill the other. Depressing shit, and that's Russian literature for you. Farm, Field, and Falconry. This one teaches you how to smell animal shit. Get Rich Quick. You can buy this book from a street vendor in Saint Denis, and the joke is that it's a ripoff, just a bunch of word salad. You can even go confront him on it, but Get Rich Quick actually does eventually come around to a pretty good explanation of how people get rich in America. Sit and sell from one man to another things that you do not make or touch or even claim to understand. Take the grain of one man and sell to another and make both men poor, and that is the grain of truth that I tell you will make you rich beyond your dreams as you ignore the dreams of others. The Otis Miller series. Otis Miller and the Arabian Prince, Otis Miller and the Black-Hearted Lady, and Otis Miller and the Boy from New York. All we know of Otis Miller is that he was a kind of Wild West Robin Hood who invented train robbing, and he was killed by a member of his own gang. The dime novels about Otis Miller are deeply embellished, regarding him as a sort of Indiana Jones-esque adventurer, heading to the Middle East in one book and New York City the next. These books are the silliest of all the Wild West stories on John Marston's bookshelf, depicting Otis Miller as more of a folk hero than a historical figure. Rambles through woods and plains. If you only read one book in Red Dead 2, it was probably this one, as it sat beside Arthur's bed at every camp besides Guarma. This is a fairly dry guidebook to herbs and mushrooms you'll find in the wild. The author mentions that he'd rather you not use the information found herein to trip balls, but this is really just a simple field guide. It makes sense that this is the only kind of book Arthur would have that much interest in. The Castle Above the Glen, The Castle Above the Moor, and The Castle in the Field of Lavender. I'm reviewing these three together because they're basically all the same book. The heroine's beloved is sent up for a crime he didn't commit, and she has to save him, and at one point someone remarks that the English are terrible. I used to write romance novels for a living, very briefly. I couldn't wrap my head around just how strict the formula was. You're really not allowed to step outside of the template at all. These books remind me of Lords and Ladies from Max Payne.
My lord?
My lady, there is a matter of great importance I must bring to your attention.
My lord, there is?
Indeed, my lady, there is indeed.
True Tales of Frank Heck. The best part of this book is this cool illustration right here. There's at least 102 Frank Heck books, so we can probably assume that these books are just as exaggerated as the ones about Otis Miller. Frank Heck was supposed to appear in the game as one of the guys you're tracking down for Jim Boy Calloway's biographer, and I expect he was intended to be more fleshed out than Otis Miller. The Lady of the Manor. This one's about a lady in the medieval days or whatever who falls in love with her husband's killer as he helps her to escape a squad of royal assassins. It reminds me of an Alexander Dumas story or something. It's kind of a decent little adventure story, and I wouldn't mind reading the whole thing. Lady of the Manor was written by Mary Beth under the pen name of Leslie DuPont. She gives John a copy of the book at a train station in the epilogue. While I'm on the subject of Alexander Dumas, check it out. Bill Williamson's hat style was popularized in the American West, specifically because of Dumas's Three Musketeer novels. The Musketeers had the brim tilted up to make room for the hammer and flint to their muskets, but not only is that unnecessary for the lever-action rifles Bill uses, he actually has the wrong side of the hat tilted up as he fires right-handed. So my theory is Dutch has been trying to get him reading, but the only thing that's really resonated with him is the Musketeers novels. Wild West Heroes. The funniest part of Wild West Heroes is when it says that Jim Boy Calloway never shoots a man in the back, and then a few paragraphs later that he sometimes shoots a man in the back. This one is about an encounter between Landon Ricketts and Jim Boy during a conflict in Mexico, and is the most plausible of all the Wild West dime novels, matching the tone and content of the game itself. This one is action-packed, with Landon shooting a knife out of Jim Boy's hand before they both engage in battle with a gang of Mexican army defectors. This is another one where I'd like to read the whole book. It's interesting how Rockstar hasn't set either of these games in the glory days of the West. It's always something we're looking at in the rear view. Zoological Compendium. The most important thing I learned from this field guide is that if you get diarrhea so bad you can't have sex with your wife, you can filter befouled water through charcoal, pebbles, and sand. I think that's basically what they still make water filters out of. In American Eden, Evelyn Miller figures into the central storyline of Red Dead 2 as a kind of reflection of Dutch van der Linde's character and worldview. In An American Eden, Miller suggests that the real America can only be found not in the desires, but in the purity of its landscape. The American Inferno. In The American Inferno, Miller dismisses American Eden as second-rate, except for that line about the purity of the American landscape. So I guess we can call that his central thesis. Like most philosophers, and like Dutch, Miller likes to hear himself talk, but he's not saying much. A third book in this series, simply titled America, can be found by John Marston if you do the optional Evelyn Miller missions in the epilogue. This final unpublished work is less a book than it is a suicide note, and a premonition of Dutch's downfall in Red Dead Redemption 1. By the time Dutch is leading his war party in Red Dead Redemption, he seems to hold intellectuals in contempt, and would probably have torched this book if he'd gotten his hands on it. J. Marston's Red Dead. While we're here, I wanted to touch on this real quick. There's an Easter egg in Grand Theft Auto V, a book entitled Red Dead by J. Marston. We can dismiss this as just a fun little reference, but knowing that Jack was always a bookworm, seeing him grow up to become a novelist is hardly a stretch. And the books found on the Marston family shelf would have been a fundamental influence in his own work. Something kind of funny about this book is that even if he changes the names around, it's still a written confession to the unsolved murder of Edgar Ross. So this is like the Rockstar Universe version of O.J. Simpson's If I Did It. And we can guess he made a killing on the book since they're still reprinting it 100 years later. History really is recorded by the winners, huh? I bet you can't hit the subscribe button before this video ends.